And I'd say quitting was easy. I did it about 173 times. But when I when I finally quit, I've never looked back, man. I've been clean for I think I was 19 years now, and just doing the work of the Lord, man. So it's been a journey, but it's definitely been a blessing and a good journey since getting off of the drugs. That's for sure.
Man, welcome to another episode of Rebuilding Life After Addiction. And I feel like Rob, we need to have like some sort of catchy slogan to throw there. I don't have that
Right.
ironed out yet.
It will come to us.
Eventually, right? Maybe just like a little beatbox section. I can beatbox for a few minutes to start out the show. You know what I'm saying? But I'm excited for another episode, man. The last few episodes have been super powerful, and some of this deep conversation, like both of us looking like fools on camera, crying, and like the whole crying Jordan face happening right here on the podcast. But it's been awesome because that's authentic expression of Holy Spirit moving, and hearing these stories and hearing how the Lord is rebuilding and transforming lives is a phenomenal thing. And I'm excited to have our guest on today, Aaron Daigle. Man, Aaron and I chatted a few months back on the podcast. We did an episode on church hurt. Aaron's a speaker, pastor, author. He's he's not pastoring a church right now, right? You pastored in the past, but he's an author, a YouTuber, and man, I reached out to him. We've been connected for a while, but he did a bunch of videos on church hurt, and I appreciated Aaron's perspective on it because it was a lot of times like that word church hurt, it's thrown around and like it's not I'm offended so I'm leaving. It's like I've genuinely been hurt, and we're exposing some of the hurt and the abuse in the church and dealing with that so that we can get better. A lot of pastors shy away from that word. They don't like it when you bring that word up. But Aaron did a great job breaking it down and really teaching on that like thoroughly, so that people who are dealing with toxic, abusive leaders can recognize it and move on and get healed. And his story about that is a couple episodes back. So if you want to go check that out. But he's also got a history with addiction and helps people with addiction. And so we wanted to dive into that part of the story tonight and just kind of talk about that. And so, Aaron, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
I'm great, man. It's good to be back. Love what you guys are doing, man, and just niching down and really reaching out to people who are coming out of, addictions, coming out of rehab and trying to establish themselves. And so it's really great to be here, man, be a part of your journey and see what we can do together today to help somebody who's listening,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you want to jump in maybe a little bit and give our viewers some context? So this is an addiction podcast, right? So we're talking about that. So maybe some of your story and some of your background and, why this topic is important to you, and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll preface this by saying, I remember saying, yes, let's do the podcast, but I had forgot what the topic was about. I don't remember even talking questions. And I was praying about it, and I said, you know what, I'm not going to prepare for it ahead of time. Let's just talk. Let's just go organic and just let, where the Holy Spirit leads us. So the topic's important because that's what the topic is today. And I'm finding out alongside all of our listeners what we're talking about today. But
I'm going to get better at that. I promise. Okay. we're a work in progress.
My pastor used to say the best sermons are the ones you don't prepare for, and it just, they just happen. Anyways, right. I guess, okay, quick story as far as what's leading up to being here with addiction. Dad was alcoholic, crackhead, and he did get sober when later on in life. But of course, I came up in that lifestyle. And then when I was 12 years old, I had been really wrestling back and forth with God. Are you real? Are you not? Am I going to live for God or not? And then finally decided to go ahead and make the leap, give my life to God. Felt like he had called me to travel and to speak in foreign countries and whatnot. And after I committed my heart to God, someone breaks in my house about 6 months later with a knife and rapes my mom in front of me in the middle of the night. So I basically flat out told God, like, if that's what you're going to allow, you're not really the kind of God I want to ride with. So deuces to the Jesus thing and straight on to drugs and just started from there. I really liked smoking weed. I enjoyed it. It was, I was, experimenting, hanging out, getting curious. And it quickly escalated. I got into harder drugs. And I remember sharing the story in my book from I Failed God. Now what? I know it was a different book, but anyways, I remember laying in a bed one time. I had taken some X pills, and I started begging God. I said, God, if you let me live through this, I'll never do drugs again. I was just rolling so hard, and I would constantly use, but in the back of my mind, I knew God was calling me to ministry. I remember one time sitting in a circle, smoking, passing the weed, watching my boys smoke, and telling myself in the back of my mind, do they know they're going to hell right now? Like I know if we die, do they realize there's something more? Because I felt God's spirit just drawing me. And I know a lot of addicts can relate. Maybe, you're listening to this episode right now and you might be just coming off drugs or in that same little place where you're struggling, but deep inside, there's more, right? But it's like those drugs get that clutch on you, and you just step back and forth, back and forth. And so that's where I was. I was wrestling. Like, do I go all in on my purpose? Do I do something better with my life? But at the same
Right.
time, I like getting high. I'm not going to sit around and say, "Oh, I'm so glad to be out of that lifestyle." I mean, I am, but it's not like sin is boring. I mean, it wouldn't be tempting if it was boring. I enjoyed that lifestyle, and I couldn't get away from it, man. And I struggled back and forth for many years with it. And then in my late teens, I finally came through, and I'd say quitting was easy. I did it about 173 times, but when I finally quit, I've never looked back, man. I've been clean for I think I was 19 years now, and just doing the work of the Lord, man. So it's been a journey, but it's definitely been a blessing and a good journey since getting off of the drugs. That's for sure.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's awesome. Go ahead,
Dude, so
Rob. I'll let you go first.
you went through, man, how old are you now?
35.
35. Wow.
Yeah,
19 years of sobriety, 35 years old, married and have kids.
we're married. Got 2 dogs.
$2. Okay, got
Yeah,
some fur babies. There you go.
yeah.
So let me ask you, Aaron, what was that pivotal moment for you when you made that shift, right? Like, as you said, you went through numerous second chances, if you will, right? Because it felt good to get high. What was that revelation? Like, what was that, that knock you off your horse going to the road to Damascus moment for you?
Honestly, Rob, I'm glad you're asking that question because truth is, I don't know. I can't
Mm,
look back and say like the shining light or you know I was on my deathbed. Like it wasn't that type of experience. It was sort of a like I really want to do these drugs. I like thugging. I like getting high. Like I enjoyed it, and that's what that was part of my identity. But then at the same time, the Holy Spirit constantly tugging and saying like that's not
right.
for you. That is not your identity. I've called you to something more. And so it was this constant back and forth where I would quit and I would go and I'd really enjoy doing the things of God, but then I would fall back into that temptation and I'd get discouraged and feel guilty and pull away from God, but then really enjoy that drug. And it was that constant back and forth. But deep inside, I knew the life I wanted was the life with Christ. I knew that I wanted ministry more than I wanted that drug.
Mm,
I could not get myself to the point to be ready. And it was a constant tug of war until finally I just pulled the rope to the other side and like I was done. But it was a decision. It wasn't an epiphany. It wasn't, like I said, a deathbed experience. It was simply a decision. Enough is enough, and I'm going after Jesus.
mm,
Yeah,
mm.
that's good. So when
What a
that
what a hard decision.
yeah, yeah, it is. It's not easy, man. And so you talk about that on you illustrated that tension, right, that existed between the life of purpose and the life of using, and I appreciate the transparency. Like, it's like, I mean, just because we're on the other side of this thing doesn't mean we have to act like we didn't enjoy getting high. Like, there's a reason we did it. And a lot of people on, they try to make themselves sound more holy and righteous. Like I wasn't holy and righteous at all. I was a drug addict and I enjoyed being a drug addict for a while. But you talk about this tension that was back and forth. And so when you finally did make that decision, you said you pulled yourself away from it and that decision was made. Like, so what was different that time around, right? From the other times that you were kind of dabbling and you felt like you enjoyed a little bit of the Lord, but kind of running back. Like were there any things that you specifically did differently in regards to maybe cutting relationships off, or some strategies that put you in that place where you were going all in for Jesus?
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Um, Doing drugs is not just an action, it's an entire lifestyle. It's an identity. And so with that comes the activities, the people, all the time consuming things, all the friendships. What I did differently, that is very clear, is that I made an entire lifestyle change. So there are
Mm,
people to this day that I miss who even support me in my walk with God. There are people who don't and also mocked me at the time of the transition. But literally, I completely changed my lifestyle. No more going to the places, completely X relationships and friendships, and shifted totally into building relationships with Christ followers, other men and women who were following God and involved in ministry. And just, I mean, I broke up with my girlfriend who wasn't following Christ after dating her for 2 years, never went to those people's houses again to this day. Like, it is a lifestyle change. And unless you're willing to make that lifestyle change, I don't know how it can happen, because it's like,
Right.
it's like there's this fire and you keep sticking your hand above the fire, but your goal is to not get burned by fire. And
Right.
until you just, pour water all over the fire and go do something else instead of sitting at that fire, you're going to keep getting burned. And so it was the lifestyle change, man. There's no other way
right.
around it.
Yeah.
Right. That's so good, man, because I think about even when I was in my addiction, I had triggers, right? Like there was those familiar landmarks. So it's like, oh yeah, I used to do that at the McDonald's. So every time I see a McDonald's now, I'm like, oh, but it would bring me back. And I think the trauma or the experience that I had in those moments and the road and the path that it led me down was more impactful than me sticking and staying the course, if you will, right? Like I think sometimes we tend to forget where we once came from, and that's what causes us to have this relapse mentality where we're just like constantly going back and forth because what we do is, and this is how cunning and crafty the enemy is that he gives you the good. He gives you this side of the tree, right? It's like, ooh, look, this is some good fruit, but he doesn't show and doesn't reveal the whole picture. And it's until we see the bigger picture that we're able to identify and realize that this is not good for me at all. And so I just constantly found myself back into this repetitive cycle of relapse. And so I want to ask you, when you said that you removed yourself from these areas or these people, if you will, like how did you manage that? Like, did you run into any of those similar experiences where it's like, oh man, I remember what I did there, or I remember what, because you probably were staying in the same house, right? Like you didn't pick up and move unless you did, but generally speaking, people are locked down to one territory. So therefore, how do they, from your perspective, get to that point?
Why you were talking, Rob, you mentioned the two sides of the tree. I had this thought that, I never met somebody who became a drug addict who started using drugs and didn't like it. If you don't
Hmm.
like drugs, you're not going to keep using them. Right. So every addict has this really, great experience with drugs for a time.
Right,
But on
right.
the flip side, I've never met someone who's been an addict for an extensive period of time who wants to continue being an addict. Like there's always the back end of it where you're like everybody wants to quit once they're addicted. So it's the fun, and then the flip side is now it's bit you and you can't get out of the teeth, right? So just
Right.
a little
Yeah.
thought came
Wow.
to me while you were sharing that. Honestly, Rob, I was younger, so maybe it was easier in the sense that you can, pivot in life,
Right,
but I ain't gonna
right,
say it was easy. I
right.
just didn't go. Like, I if I don't maybe I stayed inside. I know what I did is I started going to church a lot. I started hanging out
Okay.
with church people and involving myself in other activities. I did not
Mm,
move, so I did live in the same hood that I was growing up in, and yeah, I was around that stuff still on the bus, but I didn't have to go to their house after school. I didn't have to hang out with them on Friday night and go to the party. And so instead of doing that, I would go to the small groups at the church, or I would stay home. Like I just forced myself, and if it were easy, it'd be easy, right? And so changing that lifestyle is one of the reasons why most people never get off drugs, because
Right.
it's not easy to lose friends. It's not easy to develop
Right.
new hobbies and new routines. So I can't give an answer as to say like this is the 1, 2, 3. I just know, like, for me, it was abstinence, in the sense of like, I'm not going, period. I'm not friends with these people, period. I'm doing new things, period. Like, I just had to do it.
Yeah, that's
I don't
good.
know.
Yeah, that thread of purpose. I mean, really grabbing a hold of that new purpose. And I love the fact that, like, I just went and got plugged into church, and I hear a lot of guys struggle with that. Well, they don't accept me at church, or they're going to reject me or whatnot. And it's just like, man, just get around people that are doing something different than you're doing, and it may not be the perfect church for you forever when you're first coming into this whole freedom thing and living this life of purpose, but just getting around different people that are doing things differently and see the world a little differently than we do, right? Because addiction really messes with our our worldview and how we see the world. And so that thread of purpose, man, is a huge one. And so I kind of I stay astonished at that, looking at some of the people that have really stayed the course within programs, like coming out of programs like Teen Challenge or getting a hold of the Lord. And they seem to find something, right, and grab a hold of it. And it goes back to that point that you were making. Like, I found new passions to pursue, new friendships, and I find myself coming back to that theme in almost every one of these conversations. The guys we talked to last week, Ace and Luis. Ace has struggled with PTSD. He served in the hospital right on the onset of COVID and had the first patient as a respiratory therapist that got COVID. And around all the death and all the destruction, he started to struggle with PTSD. But now he's serving in PTSD support groups on the other side of his addiction. Camilla, that was on 2 weeks ago, she said all her friends wanted to do was get on the phone and talk about her past life. And now all she's doing is getting on the phone and talking about Jesus. And the friends aren't calling her anymore, But there's that thread of purpose. And I don't know that there was a question there. I just kind of maybe just emphasizing the point. I'm sorry. But do you have anything to speak to that?
Yeah, 100%, bro. And I actually would travel whenever I go and preach at different churches, if there's a pastor in the city involved in any kind of rehabs or addiction recoveries, there have been many times where he's asked me, hey, would you come and speak at the facility with me? And I've gone. And there's a message, unless I've already been there once before, because I can't preach the same message twice in the same place, right? I preach the same message the first time I go, every time. And the title is Purpose-Driven Sobriety. The concept behind it is that because we enjoy getting high, you can't just stop doing it and then leave a vacuum. You have to replace the drive to get high with a drive for something that is more meaningful than the high, whatever that may be. Now, you had mentioned also the concept of connecting with church and getting and exploring and seeing what else is out there. I believe that, like, Christ is the way, and connecting with the church is the best outlet. But if it's between you staying with your current set of friends and not going to church, or changing that and getting out of an addiction and still not going to church, obviously, getting out of the addiction is most important. So it doesn't have to be church for addiction purposes. It has to be God for a lot of other purposes. But if you connect with a martial arts gym, or some kind of dance group, some kind of fishing group, it doesn't matter. You just need something to replace the friendships and the activities. But that's practical side. On a deeper level, though, I believe you have to have a purpose driving you out of that addiction. Why am I going to get clean? It can be your wife, your husband, it can be your kids, it can be a calling to ministry, something. But without a driving purpose, you're not going to fight through the withdrawals. You're not going to fight through the temptations, because it's not meaningful enough. But when you put the purpose in front of you and you see whatever that purpose is, as long as it's better than getting high, which leaves a broad array of options on the table,
Right.
it'll get you out of that.
I'm practicing entrepreneurship. while peddling meth,
Yeah.
Right.
That's so good though, dude. That's some really good stuff because I feel like that was for me. I mean, oh man, dude, the restoration with my mom was one of those big things for me. Um, but some people don't. They live in broken circumstances, right? They might not have anybody. All they have is themselves, right? You have people that are homeless on the streets that are in addiction. It's like, how do I find purpose? I don't, and how do I find that value? How do I find that meaning amidst that chaos that I'm going through? That's hard when you're in that dark place to really see that light at the end of the tunnel. Um, Especially when you don't really have anybody to turn to or look at. Because I think for me, one of the hardest things when I was going through my program, and you were like, yeah, like on the surface level to be plugged into a church and so on and so forth. But I stepped out of my addiction and I didn't really have any hobbies. I had no I didn't play sports anymore. I didn't do things that were like the norm, if you will. So I had to try to find it. I'm 34 years old. I'm still trying to find a hobby for myself, right? Like I got kids. I got a wife that takes up the majority of my time. I don't really find time for myself, which puts me in positions to where I'm prone to think too much in my mind. And then I might think about things that are negative, if you will, right? But just to kind of go back to that original thought that I had, when people are in those places and positions where they don't have anybody to find and discover that purpose, it's hard for it's hard for them to. It's the words that I'm looking for. It's hard for them to find that drive because they don't know their value, they don't know their purpose, right? And so when I looked at the church after I came out of my addiction, I saw a bunch of hypocrites, and I didn't want to be involved in the church. And so when I thought the church was going to be on my side, it really was the other way around. And so I looked for this safe place, but the safe place, which we called the church, wasn't doing what the church was supposed to do.
Well, let me follow that thread up. So Rob was talking about the offense and stuff in the church and kind of addressing that, right? And I know you've spoken extensively about some of that, some of the church hurt issues and whatnot. And so, I mean, what are your thoughts kind of on that thread? Rob was going, feeling like the church is an untrustworthy place. You know what I'm saying? For some of the addicts who maybe have been ostracized, right? I remember back in the day, I couldn't show up at my mom and dad's, at certain churches, because of the state of my life. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah. You have any thoughts around that, Aaron?
Yeah. Find a better church.
That's good. Yeah.
Even in this church that I was referencing the entire time on the playlist on Church Hurt that I did on my YouTube channel, within that church, I still had a lot of great relationships. There were many great people attending the church who were not part of the the chaos and pain and manipulation that was going on inside of the pastors and the leadership team. So, I don't have to get along with or even like everyone in my church. Just
Right.
developing a few key relationships. Whether you're in church or not in church. I mean, how many friends are we going to have in our adult lives that we really connect with? 10 or so
Yeah.
if we're lucky. And so just finding those key relationships. But man, if having a church that accepts you and loves you is very important. I've traveled
Yeah.
multiple countries, multiple states. It's just, I live preaching, flying out. I'm all kind of churches and denominations. Most churches that I've been to would love an addict to walk through their doors. Not
Mhm.
only would they be thrilled to have an addict there, like they would, that's like bragging rights. Like, yeah, we're too, like they would tell the other church, like, we're reaching
Right.
addicts. What are you doing with your life? So
Right.
there are
So
some
do you
great,
think
man.
so do you think some of that mindset maybe is colored by perception, right? We see the church presented as hypocritical and judgmental in a lot of places. And so many times it colors the perception of how we see churches that we walk into. So we're kind of made our mind up, if you will, prior to even walking in the door. And that a lot of times that keeps people away from a place that could ultimately be healthy for them, in the long run.
Well, I never heard it better put in my lifetime. Society right now is very much anti-church. I saw the documentary on Hillsong. Watched all
Mm,
of the episodes about it. Very sad. story and what happened. And I'm not defending that particular church, but I noticed constantly throughout the entire documentary, there was so much bashing of the church in general and a presentation of what Pentecostals are, or what the church is. And basically it was a 4-episode commercial of like why the church is a horrible thing. I completely, disliked the spirit behind those documentaries, even though half of what they were reporting was factual information about a particular church. That being said, yeah, I think that church has been skewed and will continue to get worse as time progresses and society moves towards a very anti-Christ sort of humanistic, post church being cool era in our society. Yeah, and I mean, of course, as well as anyone from having watched the church hurt videos, I'm definitely not going to sweep under the rug the manipulation and lying and abuse that takes place. I mean, serious actual spiritual abuse taking place in many churches. But to say that that's what church is and that church is hypocrites and that it's unhealthy and like, I mean, you're broadcasting, you put 99% in this category where only 1% belong. I think you should find a good church if you're an addict, and there's ample churches that are available that are great churches.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's like, what am I gaining, right, from going there? So at minimum, I'm around people who aren't offering me drugs. That's a win. You know what I'm saying?
Huge step in the right direction.
That's it. So let's start there. The music might not be my preference. The walls might not be painted the color that I like. I may not even particularly like the preaching style. But at minimum, I'm around people who are going to encourage me to get closer to Christ. And I think that's the starting point for all of us coming out of addiction. It's like, I've got to do this 180 in my relationships, if you will. I've got to pull away from the old and start building new. Well, we got to start building somewhere. Got to lay the first brick, right? And start to build the foundation. And so that's the goal. I'm actually probably going to do a video on this, but I was thinking about what were the 3 things I would do if I was getting out of rehab today. And it's kind of an idea floating around in my mind right now. And the first one I thought of, so far, number 1 was I would find a church. That was at the top of the list. But going a little deeper into that was I wouldn't care what denomination, as long as I could get there. Obviously we don't want to go to a cult, right? Let's clarify that because people will get, but I wouldn't care about the denomination, but I would get plugged into a church. Second thing I would do would clean up all my social media presence. I was an addict before social media, right? Like,
me too.
So there is no evidence of my past other than a few Polaroids laying around somewhere. I'm not that old, but I'd clean up my social media presence, and that's part of that. What you talked about a few minutes ago, new friends. I'm deleting the old social media. God gave me a gift, so I was on drugs during the MySpace era, and I got home and I forgot my login. Couldn't get into the account. Best thing that ever happened to me.
Wow.
Lost all those connections overnight. And then number 3 is I would go find a job. And I put it in that order on purpose. But the reason the job is at the end and the church is first is because if I was unsuccessful at finding a job, then I would be serving at the church, right? And filling all my waking hours. But it's that idea of keeping myself busy, because the pull to use drugs is going to be strong unless there's something to replace that. So let me ask you the question, because this is a fun question to ask. If you were getting out of rehab today, what would be the first thing that you would do?
Honestly, I know this is going to sound cheesy and cliche. I would get a church, I would clean up all my friendships, and I would get a job. Had you asked me that question before you gave me your answer, I know the first 2 would have been on my list and I'd have struggled with the third one. However, once you said that, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm internalizing as you were talking. And I'm like, wow, yes, like purpose, even if it's not your grand ultimate destiny, career job, waking up and contributing to society and then getting compensated for it builds a sense of dignity and healthy pride and takes up some time that needs to be taken up. I mean, like, there's so many wins in just getting a job. I've never heard it said, but that's what the third thing would be on my list. Absolutely. Would be getting a job. It seems like a no-brainer, but that's fantastic, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, but that's sometimes like I used to try to tell the students coming home from Teen Challenge, like you cannot let grass grow under your feet when you get home. And I know the tendency in our context, Rob and I are doing a lot of talking to people that are coming out of rehab. The tendency is I've been in this like high speed, very busy program for the last year, and it's kept me clean. It's kept me connected. And so the tendency is I'm going to come home and I'm just going to take a break for a little bit. I'm going to chill out. And that old statement, what is it? The idle mind is the devil's playground. That is like the worst sabotage that we do to ourselves. We stop moving forward. And
Yes.
so when we get home, it's like, okay, I'm going to keep hitting the ground running. And I've been following you on Facebook. You've been on this thread about the climb and the amount of time that it takes to build. And so let's talk about that. The expectation of life from where Aaron is now, right? So when Aaron, first, started pursuing Jesus, there's been a climb along the way to get to where you are now. I mean, harder than you thought it would be. Was it easy? Has it been a great, easy journey? I mean, to get where you're at now from where you were when you first started using, because I would love to hear a little bit about that.
Oh, wow. I am. That's interesting. You asked me that, Justin. I was talking with a guy recently, and he's really stuck in ministry, and he's just frustrated, and some doors aren't opening. And he told me, he says, you're doing so well. Like you're preaching in all these countries and these different states, and you're doing YouTube, and you've published books. And that was really strange for me to hear, because to me, it sounded like when people are looking at me right now, they're seeing that I'm making moves and they're like, man, Aaron's doing it. He's at this place in life. Like, honestly, like deep inside, I don't even know if this is healthy, if this is the reality, if it's that I see things people don't see. I don't know. I don't feel successful in that sense. I don't feel like I am where I want to be, even at my age. There's so much more that I believe God has put in me, and I've seen for my life, that I'm striving for, I'm working towards, and I want to see accomplished. So like the gap between where I am and where I want to be is so vast. And I'm saying the reason I'm sharing that story is because my entire life, let's say the time I quit drugs in my late teens, all the way up until now, I've always assumed that I would have this breakthrough moment. Almost like what Rob asked me, like, what was that moment where you just, now I'm going to quit drugs? I thought like now I was going to have this great job. Now I was going to speak at this conference where all the doors are going to open. Now I'm going to publish this book, and that's going to be the one that goes viral. And I would always hope for these big breakthrough moments, because I think that's the story we're being sold through the advertising. Watch this one video and you're make $1 million by the time you finish the video, right? But it's never been like that. It's always been just this climb. And like I look back at the end of the year and I'm like, I'm not where I thought I'd be, but I'm further along than where I was. And I just honestly, where I've been at, bro, is I feel like it's been a slow, steady grind.
Yeah.
Over time, just gradually getting changes day in and day out.
Yeah, man, that's good. But that, and it's not a sexy answer, right? That, this is going to be hard work, right? I mean, and that's the part of like you're rebuilding life and trying to pursue the dreams and pursue the goals. Like, I think, I struggle with that a bit too. I mean, just being vulnerable, digging into that a little bit more. Like, I heard somebody say to me a few weeks ago, if we could only see ourselves the way other people see us, and for the good, speaking in the positive, the way other people see our influence and our impact on their lives, then it would really impact, how much more motivation that we have. Because I think sometimes we do struggle with some of that self-worth. I do personally, like, man, am I really making a difference? Am I really moving the needle? I think Facebook memories for me for a lot of that. And I know that sounds crazy, but I post a lot. And I think about seasons of life, and it's like, man, I remember looking at a memory 8 years ago where I was posting about something I was praying for. And like now I'm living in the middle of it, and
Wow.
I think that's craziness, to think about that, because we don't see it day by day. And so we've got to be able to have this Holy Spirit driven drive to keep dreaming and keep pushing for more, because otherwise I think the tendency is to go back to what's comfortable. And for many of us in recovery, what's comfortable is, well, this sucks. I enjoyed drugs back there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I can't, my life is hard right now. So I only remember the good from the drugs, and I run back to that and don't realize that it actually created a lot more turmoil than the pain that I'm feeling of having to push through just this moment.
That's so true, man. Because the pain of change is harder before it's easier, right?
Yeah.
So it's doing drugs and dealing with the consequences is not fun. And so, like I said earlier, no long-term addict wants to continue being an addict. But the pain of not doing the drugs and changing my lifestyle and going through withdrawals and like that is harder than just dealing with what I'm used to dealing with, the all the downside of using drugs. So it's harder, but then it gets easier. And then you look back and you're like, oh, now I'm glad I'm through that, right? But it's the pain of change that stops people and keeps them the same the rest of their lives.
Yeah, that familiarity. I think the pain I know is worse than the pain I've heard this said before. The pain that I know is easier to cope with and manage than the pain that I don't know, the pain of the unknown. And that process of getting there and just accepting that is very, it's a tough battle, but I think it, obviously we both know that it's worth it. Let me see, where was I going next? Sorry, my train of thought. But yeah, so back to that thread of dreaming and building life afterwards. And so trying to find purpose, because that's been the thread of all of this. So what if somebody is here? It's like, I've got the drug thing kicked. I don't want to use it anymore, but I know this is a big question to ask, and there's a lot of resources to point people to in that regard. But like, how does somebody discover that purpose? Because I think Rob alluded to it a little bit earlier. Man, I didn't have any hobbies. I didn't have any friends, and I didn't really have any clue what I wanted to do with my life. You know what I'm saying? And do you have any? I know you do a lot of ministries. So do you have any thoughts on kind of how somebody can get started on that thread of trying to discover, maybe what God's called and gifted them to do, either in ministry or out of ministry, whatever that thread might be?
Yeah. In Ephesians chapter 2, the Bible says that we are his workmanship, his masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus for good works, those good works that he prepared ahead of time for us to walk in. So let me break that scripture down to go into our purpose in discovering what that is. The Bible is telling us that God had a job, a role, a purpose, a destiny, something that needed to be done. And then it backtracks and it says, now we are his workmanship. He is handcrafting us, is what that means, so that we can walk in that purpose. So when you are born, God doesn't say, oh my God, what am I going to do with this one? What purpose am I going to give this person? It's not how it works. God has a purpose. And with that purpose in mind, he goes now and he starts handcrafting a person to walk in those good works. This is what Jeremiah talked about, like he was in his mother's womb and God knew him and formed him inside of the womb. Every intricate detail. David talked about this in the Psalms, that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. So when you're in the womb, God is putting in you your preferences, your likes, your dislikes, your personality, where you'd be born, what language you would speak, who you would meet, who you would not meet, when you would be born. All this stuff is all put together. And then you're born with God's plan for you to do this good work. That being said, when you start feeling drawn to something, interested in something, you care about something, something breaks your heart. There is a reason why that breaks your heart. There's a reason why you care about that. You yourself, Justin, when I first met you, it was when you were blogging about addiction. You've been through addiction. You've worked with Teen Challenge. And you left working with that directly as a niche and started doing other things. You were even pastoring, I think, intermittently. And now you're you're right. You're back at it. You care about addicts. You have a heart for addicts. God let you walk through that. He's brought you through it. And you always go back to that. There's people who are Christians who love God and love people, but don't really have that same burden for addicts. They don't understand addicts, or even some addicts who no longer have that desire. That's because God's not called them to work with addicts the way he's called you to do it. So whoever's listened to this, like, I would say, ask yourself, what breaks my heart? What do I care
Yeah.
about? And that will give you a clear indicator of what God is leading you into, what purpose he has for you, what plans he has for you to accomplish with your life.
Yeah, and that's so good. That's such yeah. One of my verses when I first got saved was Ephesians 1, and I actually memorized the Message version, Ephesians 1:11 and 12, where it says, "It's in Christ we find out who we are and what we're living for." Long before we first heard of Christ and got our hopes up, He had His eye on us. He had His designs for glorious living, part of the overall purpose that He's working out in everything and everyone. And that
Oh,
was my
wow.
life verse when I first got saved. The Message version, that was a lot to memorize,
Man,
but
that's I've never
man,
heard
that
it in the
verse,
Message.
it stuck with me all these years, man. And I share the testimony so often that when I first showed up at Teen Challenge, a dude looked at me and said, "God has a plan for your life." And I was foolish enough to believe it at the moment. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, and it transformed my life. It wasn't a 2-hour sermon. It wasn't a trip to seminary. It was a few words from somebody who meant it. And I believed it and connected with that. And it's been this constant. And it's funny on that because, like, yeah, I've tried to get away from addiction ministry, dude, and God just keeps drawing us back, and there's this heart because I think that so many are struggling to get to that place that you just talked about, really pursuing this purpose out, and we're constantly searching. Whereas what I just heard you say is it's already in us. We just have to uncover it by the power of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you already know. There's something in you that's already drawn to it. That's a good way of saying it, though. It's already in us. Just let God draw it out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good, man. And I think I hope one day, man, like there's just an army of addicts, former addicts out there that are just, and that was one of the things that drew me to TC so long ago was that it seemed like these guys would get out of the program and then, the Nicky Cruzes of the world and the Sonny Arcanzonas, these guys that had these tremendous testimonies and then have just went out and just plastered the gospel all across the world because they've been given this gift of freedom and they just had to do something with it. And I do think, and I don't think it's in those of us who use drugs very actively to do anything passive. I think that whatever we're going after, we're going all in.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and getting off that fence and just going after it,
Yeah, because we had to work for something that so many other people take for granted. And it's not that it's bad for them, but like they just don't know. They don't know what it's like to be sober because they've always been sober. So when you fight
Right.
so hard to have sobriety, like it's so meaningful. You're like, now what am I going to do? Like what? Because the possibilities open up to you, and there's so many options and so much purpose that you can fulfill. And you're like, wow, like let me do something now, like something other than just
Yeah.
spend my time letting grass grow under my feet, like you said.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Well, look, man, Rob had to roll out on us. he had a kid calling him, took off across the thing. Don't mean to put him on blast. I just
No,
happened to see his tree on the bottom. So,
that's all
but
good, man.
yeah, man. So tell me about some of the ministry you're doing now. You mentioned that you stop in and minister at different support groups and you're connecting with families of addicts. And man, I'd love to hear you, even that or some of the other stuff that you've got going on right now in your life that you'd like to talk about that you're passionate about at this moment. What is that?
Honestly, the biggest passion I have is my YouTube channel. I have struggled for years. I was on Instagram. I was thinking about doing YouTube. Finally started doing YouTube, and then I was kind of doing both, and I just fumbling around with it. But see what? Actually, I need to give you some context. So I was pastoring, and I always felt called to travel and speak in churches and help pastors in their churches, particularly on the weekends. And I started doing that. I ended up leaving the church I was pastoring and also getting out of my teaching career, freed up my schedule, and I start traveling. So I'm working with churches, I'm helping, I'm pastoring, I'm preaching on Sundays in all kind of different places. But then I'm throughout the week, I'm like, well, God didn't just call me to like work 2 days a week as a minister and like, right. So that's how I ended up getting into the books and then starting to mess around on social media. But I kept feeling like God was leading me to YouTube. Do it. Go all in on YouTube. And I just know like there's something in me. I think when you're doing what you're called to do, you have a sense of like peace about it. There's a sense of fulfillment. And when you're doing something that is taking you away from that, you feel it. Even if you're busy all day long, you feel unproductive when you go to sleep that night. I have a sense of satisfaction when I'm putting up the videos on YouTube. It'd be lives, longs, shorts, any of it. And so that's where I'm at in this season. I love doing it. I feel like, I get to preach a message in one church and that's good. But then if I take that message and share it on YouTube, I can preach it to the world and that's way better. So
yeah, that's
awesome.
awesome.
I love it, man. I'm passionate about the channel and that's where I'm at, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love that. I mean, just even the idea of online ministry, online opportunities these days. I mean, for somebody that is struggling to find purpose, going back to what we were talking about earlier, like, man, anybody can pull their phone out and just start talking about the things that matter to them and start to build an audience even online. I think sometimes when we're blessed in the social media age, to be able to have that opportunity and really pursue things, that are passionate. I love, Gary Vee. He's not a Christian influencer, but he said it's crazy where you could spend your time talking about Hello Kitty and earn an income from your living room.
Yeah.
But that's the reality of the internet and the world that we're in right now, is that not everybody's going to go and do YouTube and all that, but the possibility's there. And it being where it is now, like, for those who are trying to find that purpose, there's some of that out there. Yeah. YouTube, we were talking about this offline earlier, and I think it's fun, just kind of a ending point of the conversation, but it's a grind, right?
Oh my goodness, man. I've heard that it was one of the hardest to build on, and but it's definitely worth it. I think you have to pick your fit. I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way. If God's called you to it and you choose Instagram as your platform or a blog, or your podcast, like, to each his own. Personally, I just feel inclined to the YouTube challenge, the YouTube climb.
Yeah.
It's definitely got some work to it that is not involved on the other platforms, but I just like it. It's maybe a personal favorite.
Yeah. No, YouTube's fun. I'm part of the work that I do on the side, editing for people. I work with some YouTubers, and they've said the same thing, like 2, 3, 4 years of just publishing and posting videos and feeling like nobody's listening at times, but just keeping putting them out. And then all of a sudden they look up and it's like, oh, there's 30,000 people following my channel now, and this thing is starting to pick up steam. But it's just that drive and that climb. And I don't want to dive into the whole entrepreneurship and YouTube topic. I could talk about that stuff for hours, but that's not the topic of this discussion. But so Aaron, do you have any parting words for maybe anybody that's listening, around the context of somebody who may be struggling on rebuilding their life? And I know that's a broad question, but that gives you some latitude to go where you feel like Holy Spirit may be leading you.
Yeah, I would say, we talked a lot about purpose in this video, and, God's calling on your life. And that's how I was able to get out of drugs myself. I want to talk and mention a little bit about being called of God and God choosing you to do something. And I'm going to tie it back into what we were saying just now about social media and YouTube. But there's a scripture that says, many are called, but few are chosen. And I don't know about you, but I've always wondered, like, what's the difference? Or, what makes God choose me after he calls me? And then I started thinking, like, there's no way God's going to call a bunch of people and then they respond to the calling and then him say, well, never mind, I'm not going to choose you. Like, that didn't make sense. So I came to the conclusion that you can actually volunteer for a purpose in God, that you can volunteer for ministry. And here's where I'm getting that from. The book of Isaiah, God makes this call. He says, who will go for me? Who can I send? And Isaiah comes up and he says, here I am, Lord, send me. And then the next verse says, okay, go.
Wow,
My
that's good.
thoughts are like, how many people were out there standing when God said, who will go for me? Like, how many people heard that? Could someone else have been the prophet and it not be Isaiah? Could somebody else have written the book of Isaiah and it be called, I don't know, Jimicaiah or whatever the guy's name would have been, right? The crux of the matter is God's calling, but are you responding? Once
Wow.
you respond, now up until a decade ago, you could respond, but then you would have to wait forever because there were gatekeepers. If your pastor didn't give you an opportunity, you weren't going to have one. If you didn't, you had to be not only chosen by God, but chosen within the in group and the in crowd and given an opportunity. And now, even today, I'm seeing a lot of Christians who haven't broken out of that paradigm, who are still sitting around waiting to do something that God's called them to do. Now, personally,
that's so good,
I
man.
enjoy preaching in person. My favorite thing, I love to preach in a church. But there was a season where I wasn't able to preach in a church. So I preached on social media. And I can't preach all week long. I'd love to. Paul did that. He would go for days and nights. But I can preach on YouTube as much as I want, as many times as I want.
Yeah,
There's nobody stopping you. And so in today's age, in society, you need to say, here I am, Lord, send me. And you need an internet connection. And you can start doing something for God.
Yeah, that's so good, man.
To say do your purpose, because you got to have a purpose to get out of. You got to have a purpose to get out of addiction. And
yeah, man. Yeah, that's so huge. It's so funny you mentioned that because it's like in 2020, right before everything shut down, I had started. It was actually late 2019. I had started doing an audio only recovery podcast, interviewing some people. I was 7 episodes in, and I got distracted on something else, and I stopped. And I'm starting again now, but knowing what we know about the last 3 years, all these Christian YouTubers and all these internet personalities came up out of nowhere because everybody was at home. And God was speaking to me back then, but I got distracted and I paused. Now, the second, I'm not gonna lament over that forever because I don't know that the channel would have blown up. Certainly would have helped, during the pandemic when everybody's home staring at their phone. But January of this year, I knew God was speaking. It was like, okay, I can't go back and get what I didn't do before, but I can certainly start from right where I'm at and keep moving forward.
absolutely.
And that's the goal. Is just like, man, it is so easy. And I would encourage anybody listening, if you're, man, we can connect you to resources. I mean, you can hop on YouTube as your greatest resource for figuring all this out. If you've never live streamed, done social media, done any of that, I'm sure you've done a little bit because you're watching this on YouTube, but just do some Google searching and you'll figure out how easy it is to find something, or just drop a question down in the comments below. And man, one of us will connect with you and help you, try to figure some of this out. That's what this whole channel is here for. Well, I appreciate it, Aaron. And yeah, maybe we'll have to do another one where we can get on and Rob can be a part of the discussion. Him and I joke all the time, man, because my disposition is, what are the 3 things I need to do to get across the other side of the yard? And I'm very, very much in that realm. And Rob's like, tell me what the color of your door was at your house during shop. He's very deep, very,
Okay.
and so we've got that balance, man. I enjoyed talking with you, man. Thanks so much.
Oh man, I always enjoy it, bro. I've been seeing you, just over the last 2 months, really. I almost DM'd you, and I probably should have, now that I'm saying it to you out loud, but just to say, like, it's lonely, bro. It's lonely doing the online thing. In the world's definition of success, you feel like I'm putting out, I should see some kind of fruit, and fruit meaning subscriber base, monetization, and so when you're working hard, you're putting in the effort and you're not seeing that, it can be so besetting and discouraging. And so it's also a ministry I have found that people don't always understand. some of my friends who are pastoring right now. I try to connect with them and like share my heart, and one of them recently told me, he says, I mean, well, what you do is so much easier than what I do. I mean, you just sit around your living room making videos. I mean, but it's like you don't see all the crying in the background of like, am I doing the right thing? Like, is this ever going to work? And I try to keep my focus, man. And, because fruit in the kingdom of God is not always what we determine to be fruit. But I mean, I sure would like to be, monetized with a silver play button and, successful like all the rest of them. I mean, if the world can do it, why not do it as a Christian, voice? I mean, and still get some of the same, practical feedback from it. But it's a struggle. For me, I'm saying that to say, seeing you doing it and grinding up and posting and just sharing your heart, like I see that, I'm like, there's another like coworker, like I know he's in that grind. I know he can relate to me, man. So it's been an encouragement to see you, bro.
Well, I appreciate watching you too, man, because I did this whole interview style thing, and even Rob, when he got on, and we're like, let's do a co-host, because sitting down and just talking into the camera alone is immeasurably harder than people think it is. And I know this is kind of counterproductive to what I just said 5 minutes ago. And don't mind my double-mindedness. Pick up your phone and do it anyways. But that being said, it is hard to sit down and record a video. Like, I mean, I don't know. I'm like you. I enjoy preaching in front of people and interacting with people. Like, you get that feedback from the crowd, and the camera doesn't give you that. Like, you don't get that instantaneous feedback. And so it's you're sowing those seeds and really trusting that God is going to give the increase. So that's all there is, right? So,
bro, I'm gonna say this to make a point. Please don't, like, my heart, dude. When I'm in public speaking from a platform in a church, I am a dynamic speaker. God has really gifted me. I've been preaching since I'm 18 years old. I'm a really gifted speaker. That being said, I've been doing videos for years. And I was watching my video because I was editing my own video, getting ready to post it. And I was like, this is not good. Like, I lack something. I don't know. So I told my wife, I said, baby, you know how I preach in church? Am I like good on camera like that? And she just looks at me. She's like, no, there's something on camera you lose when you do it. And I'm like, oh my God. So yes, bro,
man,
it is so hard, man.
Yeah, man. Well, that's awesome. Yes, I love it. Yeah, man. Your wife and mine sound like they would get along. So, yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, fantastic. Well, thanks, Aaron.
Oh yeah, dude. Thank you for having me, bro. It's always a pleasure to connect with you, and anything you need along the way, man, on your journey, reach out to me, bro. Open door with you.
Yeah, likewise, man. And for those of you watching, please, all of Aaron's links will be down below in the description. So please check his channel out. Are you on Facebook right now? Are you just primarily Facebook and YouTube, right?
YouTube, yeah. YouTube's where I'm posting everything. And then I got my books on Amazon, but YouTube is where we can connect best.
I just had birthday balloons go across my face.
I saw it, bro. It was really cool.
What was that?
We celebrated.
Yeah. So, anyways, Aaron's on YouTube. Check him out. Go check some of his videos out, and give him subscribe and all that stuff while you're over there. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Rebuilding Life After Addiction. We are here on YouTube again once a week, and then Facebook, we've got the group going on as well. And so if you're looking for a community of people to chat with and engage with and all that jazz, the community on Facebook is a great place to do that. God bless you guys. Thank you for tuning in.